Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose.
We're all children of God, but in what way do God's men actively strive to serve their Lord? At God's Men of Influence, we believe that when men are open to sharing their testimony, God's light shines into the darkness and sets loose his transforming power into our lives. Proverbs 27:17 says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another." Our mission is to create an environment where men can sharpen each other through the sharing of changed lives, and how through God's grace and mercy, we can become better husbands, better fathers, and better men in the service of his kingdom. Be blessed, be joyous, and be welcome here at God's Men of Influence.
Hey everybody, it's Dino from God's Men of Influence, and I have a great show here for you today. It's funny because I know I always say I have a great show for you, but truth is, every single man that I have come on this show has a story, and I personally learn so much from every single guy. I like to call them the nuggets that every man has that he's experienced at some point in his life. And I'm talking from the old dudes like the guy I have here today, Jim.
Thanks, Dino.
Or some of the young guys that I've had on the show too. I've even learned from them. So, open your hearts, open your ears, and I believe God will speak to you in many different ways if you're open-hearted and are available to listen. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Jim Hogan to the show. Jim, welcome to the show.
Dino, thank you for even talking to us old guys.
You are an old guy. You're what, 70?
70.
But that's not why I'm calling you old. I'm calling you old because you have knee replacement, pins in your shoulders, pins in your foot, and that only happens to old guys, right?
Well, I don't hope so, but
because of what you did when you were young.
Yeah.
And there you go. So for everybody listening who's younger than Jim here, listen to what he's done in his past and maybe, make some of those corrections early so you don't have to have all those pins in your body.
Yeah, take care of yourself.
Right? And that's just physical.
Yeah.
We're talking about spiritual.
Yes.
And that's even worse. When you have those pins in your body on the spiritual side, there's some real damage that can be caused there. So correct it as early as you can and set your life on the right path. All right. So before I start, just real quick, godsmenofinfluence.org. If you're on Facebook, just God's Men of Influence, you'll see our logo. It's the cross with the sash going through it that says God's Men of Influence on it. Hit the like button. Support us there. Also, just click, comment, like, do whatever, share, and help get the word around. So, Jim Hogan.
Irish.
All right. First question I ask everybody is, are you ready to be exposed?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm used to that.
So I want you to tell me first who you are today, and then I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions that takes us back to who you used to be, and we're going to walk back through your journey back to today again.
I asked you earlier, what do you want to be when you grow up? Yeah. I had to ask myself that same question, and so it took me about 4 months to really figure it out. And the answer to that question is I want to be the best ambassador for Jesus Christ. And that's my B. So if I can figure out what I want to be when I grow up, and I'm still 70 and growing up, then the do's come easy.
Yeah, I like that. And you were telling me earlier before we started turning the mics on here that you've been married for...
just 48 years.
Not bad.
Married my high school sweetheart. And we've kind of grown up together. And it was not a very easy start. Some dark times during that start. As we compare our lives, Debbie and myself, she grew up in a very wonderful, loving, caring family. And I grew up in Beavis and Butthead's house. I grew up in a very dysfunctional, alcoholic family. And I didn't realize how dysfunctional it was until I met Debbie and her family.
Yeah. Did you grow up here in Southern California?
Yep. I grew up in Pasadena. Debbie grew up in La Cunada. And it was very interesting because both of us, on a spiritual level, had been turned off. When Debbie was a 12-year-old, as I said, I met her just a few years after that. her pastor, her church pastor of her parents' church, ran off with the church secretary, and it really blew her church apart. It blew her belief in church, and it really wounded her. I, on the other side, I was raised Catholic, and the nuns and the priests, for whatever reason, were keeping me away from that relationship with Jesus. So we both came together believing in God, but not really in church.
Wow, interesting. And at what point in your marriage or life did you guys turn back to church?
Well, it's interesting. We went through some really dark times when.
And I don't want to know them just yet, because I'm going to ask you all those questions here in a little bit.
Okay. Well, our when we turned back to God, Debbie turned back to God 9 years before I did. A wonderful lady came to her, invited her to a Bible study, and through that Bible study, Debbie got reconnected to Jesus. And she became that Jesus freak. She would bang me over the head with the Bible, and then finally the women got a hold of her and said, no, just be patient, pray for him. So for 9 years, she prayed for me.
Wow.
As I told you, I'm Irish, I'm a little slow in the uptake. But after 9 years, then I became the Jesus freak. I got turned on, and that's how it got started.
Awesome. Well, I'll tell you what, let's start with these questions. What's your favorite verse and why?
My favorite verse is Romans 8:28, and let me tell you what it means to me, but let me read it first. And we know that all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. I think all of us go through difficult times and wonder why we're being beaten up, but God has a purpose. As I shared with you before, I became a believer. I would shake my fist at God and say, why are you doing this to me? And after I became a believer, I changed that answer to, or that question is, God, what are you preparing me for next? So this is, he uses everything for his good, as long as we are connected with him and love him.
Yeah, I love it. What would you say your biggest weakness is as a Christian?
For me, that's pretty easy. Pride. I think most guys, we put on that Superman outfit and we're leaping tall buildings in a single bound, but we're not including God. We're not allowing him to work in me. I think I can do it all, and I find out that I can't, and I need help, and I need God. So my weakest is got to be pride. I try to do it by myself, but I can't do it.
Yeah. What about on the flip side? What's your biggest strength?
On spiritual strength, I would say exhortation. I am very much there for people and to exhort them. I have the gift of discernment. I can meet people and almost instantly kind of say, this person needs help or this doesn't. I've seen people that are hip deep in issues that, have really dragging them down. So I love to, part of our ministry is coming alongside and nurturing and loving pastors. Well, it's the same thing with everybody out there. If I become a good friend of yours, Dino, I'm going to exhort you in a way to help you maximize what God wants you to be.
Yeah.
I'm here to be kind of a person who encourages people.
Awesome. So this next question is the one that just kind of defines the direction of the show.
Okay.
And you can answer in any way you want. I mean, when I ask you, have you ever had any dark times in your life? What comes to mind?
Yeah, I have several dark times.
You're 70, right?
So 70. So yeah, I've had a lot of opportunities to go through the dark. And so, I started out as I said earlier, I grew up in a very dysfunctional family, alcoholic. My older brothers, who were much older than sister, I was the last one born. And by the time I came along, my mom had just been so emotionally beat up by my dad's drinking that she really didn't want to take care of me. So for the first 6 years of my life, I was nurtured and cared for by a black nanny. If you've seen the movie or read the book, The Help, that was my life for the first 6 years.
Really?
And so I didn't realize, how dysfunctional I was until I met Debbie's dad in particular. He became my surrogate dad. I became his the son that he didn't have. He had 2 daughters. And we grew together very quickly. And in fact, we learned how to fly together. And the dark part of this is that as I graduated from college and went to this wonderful man who is a pilot like myself, I had been hired to go learn how to be an airline pilot for Ozark Airlines. Well, I asked Debbie's dad for her hand in marriage, and I was very surprised he said yes, because I was taking her out of his alma mater college that she was then a sophomore. I was going to move her down to San Diego and go to flight school. Well, within 30 days of that, my mentor, my close friend, Debbie's dad, not only Debbie's dad, but Debbie's godparents were all killed in a mid-air collision.
Wow.
So that was very, very dark for us. And we moved our wedding up because Debbie was an orphan. And so we moved back from San Diego back up to L.A., moved into a small house, had a dog and a cat that we inherited from her parents.
So real quick, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's fine.
So her mother, her father, and her godparents.
All gone, mid-air collision.
So 2 planes colliding?
Yeah, it was actually her father was in the key landing, and he was hit from behind by a plane that was not in radio control, or not in, he was an instrument-rated pilot. The guy that ran into him wasn't, and
wow,
the odds of that happening are a gazillion to 1.
Wow.
So, but that that was one of our darkest spots when we were getting married, and we weren't real believers then.
Yeah.
And so we struggled through that. And then another dark part, in our life is that, I couldn't put her through being a pilot anymore, so I had to give up that career. Sure. And I went to work for a guy selling insurance, and he became an instant mentor to us. He took us out the first week and talked to us about date night, and we continue that today. But this guy was just an unbelievable guy. I learned so much about business. I learned how to write business letters, how to do cold calls, how to answer the objections, all the stuff you learn in sales. And I just loved him. But I knew I didn't want to stay in the insurance business. So after Debbie graduated in 2 years, I went to this individual and told him that I was leaving the L.A. area, moving down to Orange County, and I didn't want to sell life insurance anymore. Mm-hmm. And he said, go home, tell Debbie you have my blessing, and have a great date night. Well, I go back the next day to empty my desk, and we worked on the 9th story in a tall building in L.A., and there was a wreath next to the elevator. I was getting on that elevator, and I go up, and I found out that 2 hours after I had talked to George, that he jumped out the 9th story window and committed suicide. And that was devastating to me, because not because I was leaving the insurance business, but that was the only way. He had gotten himself into some really bad investments, and that was his way to pay $2 million to his family, and he had 3 beautiful little girls. So boom, boom, losing parents, losing godparents, losing your mentor, and then moving to Orange County.
And I know this isn't your story, but since you brought that up, the way you said it, it was his way of paying $2 million. I know this is just so horrible, but in a sense, I can see the honor in him of saying, hey, I'm not going to put my family through it. And it's his way of saying, I'm going to take care of you still. And it's so horrible, but yet I know that's what he was thinking.
Yeah.
Right. Or was he just saying, I can't handle this anymore, I'm out?
I think is the second one. I think that he became so selfish and so into himself, and really didn't think about his family. You couldn't do a more selfish thing,
sure,
than to take yourself out and leave your family alone.
Yeah, but when you're so screwed up,
I know,
because I've talked to a lot of guys that's what they say, and it's a joke, right? Like, I'm worth more dead than I am alive. But when guys get themselves into something,
yeah, but it's when these guys get themselves into something, they isolate themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, and they think they can do it all themselves.
Right.
And when they find out they can't, this is when they get to a breaking point. This is what happened to George.
Yeah.
If somebody had been in his life to a listening ear, and saying, hey, George, you're not alone. A lot of people have lost all their money.
Yeah.
Okay, you can work out of this. Look at the beautiful family God has given you.
Yeah.
But nobody was there helping him.
Yeah. That's too bad.
Yeah, I was too young. I didn't understand.
All right, so let's move on. So then what?
Well, from there, we moved down here to Orange County, and I started flipping homes and did very successful in that.
And how old were you at this point?
I was 26, 27.
And how was Debbie? I mean, pretty devastated still, I would assume. But how was she surviving through this, or was she going back to the fact and having these moments of, hey, my parents are dead and I got nobody?
You know, for those first few years, say 5 or 10 years, we were kind of dull, or we were just beat up. Debbie was trained to be a school teacher, and at that time, getting a job was very easy. So the same day that she found out that she had landed a beautiful job as a school teacher, found out that she was pregnant, and so we have our first child. And God presented us a son that was very colicky, very difficult to deal with, and like a lot of young parents, there's no instructions on this little kid. You can't turn him over and say, here, do this and this will happen.
Yeah. Or take the batteries out.
Yeah, take the batteries out. But we got into where we were alone. Debbie's parents were gone. Okay, my parents were, they were non-functional.
Yeah.
And now we were on our own. And this is where a wonderful lady where we live came to Debbie. And she had known about Debbie's parents, and she said, "Could I become our son's name is Jack? Could I become Jack's surrogate grandmother?" I'd never seen Debbie give somebody our son as fast as she did, because Debbie and I really needed help. I was then I had changed jobs from flipping homes because somebody asked me to build them a restaurant, and they didn't have enough money to pay me, so I ended up being a major stockholder, and then ran a restaurant at the same time. So I was gone. I had basically had this mistress called a restaurant, and Debbie was at home alone with this colicky baby.
Yeah.
And our marriage was in a heap of hurt. So finally, I sold the restaurant, came back, and we were pregnant again. And this time, Debbie had become a believer because of that lady who asked to be the grandmother of our first son. Had taken her to her Bible study, and within a couple of months, Debbie had committed her life to Christ. And she was a very strong believer, and she started praying for me. But we became pregnant again, and God again allowed us to go through another dark period. We lost a full-term little girl. I raised my fist and was angry with God. Debbie had peace. She had her Bible study girls around her. She had God in her life. She understood, this is just a part of life. And so she walked through it a lot better than I did. And I was not carrying that child. She was.
Wow. Yeah.
So that was another dark time in our lives, primarily for both of us. So, but then a year later, we have our second child. We're back into the remodeling business. And out of that remodeling of our new home, another business started. And it was the 1976. That's how old I am. Flipping homes designing homes were in the antique mode, and so it was the bicentennial, and so Debbie asked if I could get an old pull chain toilet for upstairs and one for downstairs, and I couldn't find any, so I made two, and our neighbors and friends loved them. And so a year later, I'm selling $1 million worth of toilets and toilet seats.
No kidding.
We called the company Heads Up. And it was one of those just, rags to riches type deal. And my ego became unlivable. I mean, I was out of control. I thought I was the smartest guy in the world and I could do anything. And we grew this business. And then 2 years later, Sony Corporation, the TV guys, came along and said, could you make us cabinets? Because we understand you know how to work with this bent plywood. We had a hamper that we had designed. And so now we became the largest case good manufacturer. That's a cabinet manufacturer on the West Coast. So my ego was even further out of control. So I was, making a lot of money, being very successful, and then God decided to bring me to my knees, and I did a lot of dumb things.
And how old were you?
I was just about 32.
Wow,
Young, and now I was allowing my family to go to church. Okay, and I would come along, but I was really not a participant.
Yeah,
I would listen, but I wouldn't really,
digest.
hear it. Yeah. So, but God was working on me. He took my business away. That kind of brought me to my knees. About the same time, I met a guy that really brought the Bible to life for me. I started going to his Bible study, and then I finally turned my life over to Christ through that relationship with this individual. He became my best friend. At the same time, he started a new little church, and with 50 people in it, and that was 1980. And then from 1980 to 1990, that 50-member church grew to 9,000. I went on the board in 85, and I was chairman of the board by 1990. And was under my watch. My best friend, the guy who led me to the Lord, had a moral failure and blew that church apart. It was like taking a hand grenade and rolling it down the aisles of the church.
Wow.
Because this was a secret, back then, secret-sensitive church. So there was a lot of brand new and baby believers in that church. Mm-hmm. And it was devastating. The board came to me and said, hey, we need somebody to help transition the church while we go find a replacement for this guy. And so they wanted me to go on staff. We had 150 employees, 15 associate pastors. And I didn't want to do it. I said no. And then I went home and told Debbie that they'd asked me this. And she said, well, what does God have to say? And I hate it when she does stuff like that. And so I said, okay, this can be a one-year gig. I can do this. So I said yes to it, figuring I'd only be there for a year. And within a couple of months, we found a guy who's actually on staff to hand the baton to be the leader of this church. And within a couple of weeks, the new chairman of the board caught him in the act of doing something he shouldn't be doing in the office with a woman that he was not married to. And then I found out that my secretary, who I had inherited at the church, was having an affair with another associate pastor. So God was taking me to the school of hard knocks, and losing my best friend who led me to the Lord, having a guy come in and having a moral failure, and another guy on staff having a moral failure, and that was setting us up for what we're doing today with Standing Stone. We shepherd shepherds.
I'm going to stop you right there because
Sure.
I want to really get into Standing Stone. It's really an awesome ministry, but I want to just digest a little bit of what you just told me.
Sure.
And the piece that there's a couple questions I have. You're a young man making a ton of money. God brought you to your knees.
Yeah.
And did you lose the entire business, or did you just have to reorganize everything? And what happened when you dropped to your knees? Like, that's where the meat of everything is. That's what I think. Whatever you did at that moment. Over the next however many years is what defined you and brought you to where you are now.
Yeah. I lost the entire business. I let in 1980, Jimmy Carter came into existence. He took the interest rate up to 20+%. In the housing industry, which our bathroom division was closely tied to, the cancellation of orders, we couldn't keep up with the cancellations, let alone fulfillment. Yeah. And so this egg in our basket, Sony Corporation, became too big. And then some other tactical mistakes I made is not adding more eggs to the basket And so they took us over, and they said, "This is what we're going to pay you." And it was like 10 cents on the dollar, and don't let the door hit you on the way out.
Yeah.
So I was really, really devastated. I'd gotten into an organization called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. I thought I knew everything. I thought I was the brightest, smartest dude, and God just took me down and said, "No, it's not about you. It's about me."
Yeah.
And that was the big lesson I learned.
And then, and during that period of time, because it was something very similar to me, how long did it take you to turn to God and literally drop to your knees and say, help me, I'm sorry, I get it.
Have you ever had a panic attack?
No.
Yeah, they're pretty devastating. I mean, you think you're going to die. You get pushed into a corner, and your heart's thumping. I went through panic attacks, everything you can imagine. As I'm driving to work to say goodbye to everybody, I could barely get myself to drive that car to say goodbye to the 300 employees that were working for me.
Yeah.
And so God was, as I was driving there that day, there was a guy who was in a wheelchair, and he was dressed very shabbily. And I think God was showing me, he said, "You're sitting here driving in a Mercedes, up to this job that I allowed you to grow. But look at this poor guy here on the sidewalk."
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of a wake-up call. But to answer your question, it was pretty quick. It was within several weeks, because I had been for 9 years slowly being nurtured by God through exposure to a lot of wonderful preachers and through this Bible study. The Bible finally came to life for me.
So you had been going to this Bible study while all this was happening. It wasn't like you started after you lost everything.
No,
okay.
no.
Okay.
Yeah, God was prepared.
So you had somewhere to turn.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I've interviewed now, I think 120 guys, and there's a lot of common denominators between all of them. And I got to tell you, the biggest one is that you answered two of them, and that was the pride seems to be the biggest weakness, right? Which always leads to one of the darkest times is losing everything and dropping to your knees.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, when I say losing everything, it's either one or both: money, wife, or both.
Yeah.
And
thank goodness my wife stuck with me.
You're very lucky.
Yeah.
You're very lucky. And dropping to your knees finally makes that prideful man realize he's no bigger than a little ant. Right. And he better get to work. And when he says, I'm here for you, take me over, help me, I will do whatever you say, all of a sudden everything changes.
Yeah, when you change your God from money to the real God, things really change.
Yeah. So I was glad I wanted to dissect that a little bit and just really want to hear it, because, the men that are listening to this, I can guarantee a lot of them are going through the exact same thing at different stages in their life, right? 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. You're struggling. And oftentimes, if you can catch yourself before you get to that point of dropping to your knees, because you don't have to drop to your knees, by the way, and say, I've lost everything, now help me. You can drop a little earlier,
right,
before you lose everything, and say, I get it, save me now, please.
Yeah, I think that how much pride you had. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So
I encourage you to do it sooner than later.
Sooner than later.
Yeah.
Okay, so you get to this point now where everything that's happened leads you to starting this ministry.
Yeah. So this ministry, we finally righted the ship. A guy by the name of Bob Shank came in to drive the boat, but and then after 4 more years. So I was on staff for 5 years. But after those 5 years, we merged back with the mothership that we had left to start that new church. And then God was really putting on Debbie's and my heart of trying to work towards not having these failures that we had experienced for two generations. Her parents' generation with the pastor running off with the church secretary, my best friend had an affair, and then the other two there at the church. So we moved to Colorado and started building a log home to be able to have a location to allow us to bring pastors and their spouses for a retreat. What Bob Shank did was he, after the merger, he started a ministry called the Master's Program. And it was during that Master's Program, Debbie and I were part of that beginning class, that we learned that the aha moment went off for me, because I couldn't figure out why these guys were crashing and burning. And what Bob brought to the table was a 3-year program that basically addressed those issues. And what these issues were is that these pastors were out of balance, their emotional, physical, and spiritual realm. We call it the 3-legged milking stool. They didn't know how to manage their time, so time management. They didn't understand their gift mix, and they would try to use gifts that they weren't good at, and that would drain their battery. And then you combine all of those together, and of course that blows your marriage apart. So what we started to think about was bringing couples out to where we were in Colorado and take them through a 1-week retreat, 6 nights, 7 days. And no, you can't come for 4 or 5. It's 6 nights. And we used the curriculum that Bob had developed through the Master's Program. So we would do a mini Master's Program with these couples. We did 1 couple at a time, and this is how we got started. But before we even started that, God wanted one more catalyst to have us do it. Because we got to a point where we weren't sure if we wanted to launch this ministry or we didn't. But then our youngest son called us one day, and he told us that his junior high, then high school pastor, and now senior pastor had stood up at his church and told him and his then girlfriend, now wife, that he had a moral failure. So that was 3 generations of God saying, you need to go do this. So that's how we launched Standing Stone. So Standing Stone is a ministry. It's kind of, I can compare it to a story. And it's, and we call it the story of the battle for the bride. And so, of course, in all good stories, this is a story of good versus evil, God versus Satan. Okay, and the battle is over the bride. We know that battle's already been won, but God's coming back. Jesus is coming back for the bride, and Satan, the bad guy, wants to take out the bride, and is continually doing that by attacking, of course, the leaders of the church. These are our heroes. These are the Luke Skywalkers or the Princess Leias, who husbands and wives who are leading our churches. And of course, like in any good story, like in Star Wars, the Darth Vader comes in, and for pastors in particular, there's 3 things that they run into, just a few. One is that they don't feel that they're prepared from seminary to deal with the situations that they're being handed in this complex world today. Second, that they put their family, wife and kids, into a glass house to live up to expectations that nobody can live up to. And the third thing is to become isolated and alone. They think they can do it on their own. They have that Superman outfit, and they're isolated. And 60-some-odd% of these pastors today have no close personal friends that they can go to with their problems. So when you go to church on Sunday, the only person in your church that doesn't have a pastor is the pastor and his wife of that church. So now comes to the good part of the story. Okay, we got the heroes, Princess Leia and Luke Skywalkers. We got Darth Vader working them over. Okay, but now we bring in Yoda, And Yoda for us are our shepherds. These are the guys that we go out, recruit, train, and deploy to be proactive, to call on these churches, to make a relationship connection with those pastors and their wives, to be able to have a place where they feel safe, confidential, and trusted relationship to deal with them. There isn't a pastor that I know that starts out in his ministry and says, 10 to 15 years from now, I'm going to go out and have an affair and blow my church apart. And so what happens is that they drift off course. My best word picture is if the captain of the Titanic had changed course 1/2 of 1 degree a mile from that iceberg, things would be different. And so what we offer through our Yodas, our shepherds, is that relationship at no cost to that pastor. Because our Yodas go out and they've recruited their own army who protects them with a shield of prayer and provides them with the financial support so they can go freely be friends in close, trusted relationships with these couples, and that they offer a lifelong mentoring relationship so that they can continually nudge that couple or that individual back off a destructive course or keep them on a correct course.
Yeah. How long has it been now? How long ago did you start it?
We started in 2002. And our distinctives and the things we learned is that that senior pastor has usually a disconnect between himself and his board. So our Yodas, our shepherds, can come in and tell the board things that pastor would love to tell them. Second thing we learn is that the wife is more beat up than the husband. And the third thing we learn is that the young pastor who's just starting out is dropping at a 50% rate within the first 5 years of ministry. So we are going into Bible colleges and seminaries now and doing practicums or course studies that tell them the real life of what it's like to be in ministry. You show up, as the new junior pastor, and they tell you immediately, forget the Greek, forget the Hebrew, and you're not going to get up on the stage for five years. But you do have to go out and raise $3,000. You're going to take the junior highs down to Mexicali for Easter week. And gosh, we're really sorry that your wife is pregnant and due that week, but that's what you're going to do. So the realities are the underbelly of the church is we're trying to connect with them with these Yodas who have decades of experience, that been in the moccasins that they're getting into to help them along the way.
On this show, I've interviewed plenty of men that have been kids of pastors.
Yeah, PKs.
PKs?
Yeah, preachers' kids.
Got it. And I got to tell you, talk about messed up.
Yeah.
I assume that goes along the lines of just like the wife has it more difficult, oftentimes the kids too, because they're not allowed to be kids.
No, they live in that glass house.
Yeah.
And they're held to expectations that none of us could live up to. So it forces them to put on false masks and not be themselves.
And they learn how to be a fake person from
Right.
the very beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've talked a lot about the moral failures.
Yeah, but that's not all the problems that they run into. Burnout is probably the biggest one. And burnout is, I just can't get up. I can't do this anymore. A typical pastor ends up coming to the office on Monday and finding out he's pregnant and has to deliver this next weekend. And that's every Monday if he's the teaching pastor.
Yeah.
So that it is a very, very difficult and hard task to keep up and keep fresh and keep doing things, to the point where you would think that a pastor has a tremendous prayer life because he's got his nose in the Bible every week. Not true. 95% of pastors don't even pray with their wives.
He's too busy working.
And what they're doing in their preparation sometimes that doesn't allow it to get into their heart. It gets into their head so they can regurgitate chapter and verse of what they want to talk about. But do they really own that in their heart? Are they spiritually connected? Oftentimes not. And this is the time management that we talk about. God gives us all exactly the same amount of time, but how are we using it? What is our priorities? And because if a pastor, if we use the priority of God's number one, okay, wife and family are number two, and ministry's number three, okay, oftentimes in a pastor's life, 1 and 3 get mixed up, and number 2 gets screwed.
Gotcha. So what's the solution? How do you help fix this?
Well, the way we help fix this is that we bring alongside our Yodas. These are men and women who have been battle hardened because they've been through it. They've seen it. They know what it's like to be out there, to live in the glass house, to be isolated and alone, okay, to not have the training. They had to get it on their own. And so what we do is come alongside these pastors and their spouses, and we support them through these relationships and having the knowledge. Coming in to a pastor and say, hey, Dino, when's the last time you went on a date night? Let Debbie and I watch your kids while you go on a date night. Just healthy things to allow them to be refreshed and renewed, to connect with God and connect with their spouse.
Yeah. How did you come up with the name?
That's interesting. At our house in Colorado, we were on the Navajo River, and the guy who developed the property said we needed rocks and gravel to build the roads in this development. So he said, could we come dig a pond for you and leave you a beautiful pond, but we'll harvest the rocks. So in that process, there was a really neat guy. I mean, I got to drive those big trucks, the tractors and all that stuff. Yeah. But the guy who was excavating our pond came upon these 12 huge stones that they were too big to crush, but they were beautiful for the head of the pond and the below of the pond, and then several around where we had our fire pit. Well, Debbie got inspired because we were at the time that we needed to name our ranch, and so Moses was a mentor to Joshua, and Joshua was being chased across the Jordan, and the Lord separated the water, and the armies, the 12 tribes, ran across, before the enemy was going to get them. And Joshua said, "Go back, gather stones from the middle of that river, and stack them over here as a monument to future generations that something miraculous happened here with God's help." And so the 12 tribes went back, grabbed those stones, and they are there today still, standing stones. And so that was because what we were doing was a mentoring relationship. And Joshua was mentoring the 12 tribes, and they built this monument using those stones. So that's how the name came about.
Cool. Nice. All right. So just moving forward so we can wrap it up, fast forward now to today.
Yeah.
Right. You've got this great ministry, got a wife of, was it
48
years?
Yeah.
2 kids?
2 boys and a foster son.
A foster son. How many grandkids?
6.
6. Nice. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And you're out there just spreading the word.
Yeah, as I tell people, we are gloriously out of control. We are across the nation now. We're in 15 different states. We just trained our very first Asian couple, Koreans. They are translating all our material into Korean. They, at the end of the summer, are going to Korea and start doing standing stones.
Cool.
In Korea. We trained our first Hispanic couple, and they are excited. They're going to be going down to Mexico and doing standing stones. They were in the office yesterday. They're going to be doing standing stone in Mexico. So none of this was our idea. This is all, I won't call it organic growth. This is all God's growth.
Sure.
That's why I say we're gloriously out of control.
And how does somebody support this? I'm assuming you guys take donations.
Absolutely. We're a standard 501c3. We need several things. One is your prayer Prayer is a foundation of Standing Stone. We don't do anything without prayer. We need support in regards to, we do these retreats that I think alluded to a little bit. We do these intensive 1-week retreats, and we do them in vacation homes across the nation. So if God has stirred you with a vacation home, lend us God's home for a week.
Cool.
And then the other thing is, of course, finances. Our website, you can find the donate button very quickly, is Standing Stone Ministry, that's singular, standingstoneministry.org. And come and visit us, see what we do. We've got a great website, very simple to navigate through, and love to have you become a part of Standing Stone team.
Awesome. So last few questions. What kind of advice would you give somebody right now that might be going through a hard time?
Are you talking about pastors?
No.
Anybody.
Anybody.
Don't go alone. There are people who love you enough who will come alongside you. The like my friend George, who committed suicide, he isolated himself, away from friends. And find good friends who love you enough, who are willing to get in your face and say, hey, dude, you're screwing up, and I love you enough to tell you the truth. Don't get a bunch of rah-rah people who just keep fluffing you up. Get some real people in your life who love you enough to tell you the truth.
And let me ask this question too. What kind of advice would you give to somebody who's at a church, lukewarm, and can't help but look at all the faults of the church, and even can kind of read between the lines and see some of the moral failures that are happening all over the place?
Yeah.
What advice would you give that person?
We have a lot of bad examples, and the press really loves to blow them up when we have moral failures and other issues. Using myself as an example, I became a baby believer, but then I had to pick up the spoon myself. I know you shared with me, you read through the Bible, and so part of this is, again, is moving from, say, adolescence to adulthood, and maturing in your belief. Don't expect somebody else to do that for you. You got to pick up that spoon and feed yourself to a certain extent. And again, it's allow yourself to get involved with, say, a Bible study or other growth groups that are going to help you mature in an effective way.
It just dawned on me too. Right after I asked the question, I was thinking about how I would answer it instead of listening to you. But you know what I came up with is, don't let somebody else's actions or behavior determine how you're going to feel towards God.
Right.
Or the church, for that matter. Because things are going to happen. I mean, they happen all the time, right? Yeah. But don't let their actions determine you.
Yeah, it's a relationship. It's a relationship not so much with the church, which is very helpful, but it's the direct relationship with God.
Yep. And is there a book that you could recommend?
I'm reading several books. I read like 2 or 3 books at the same time, so I'm a little weird in that. Okay. For business guys, this is an older book. Leadership is an Art by Max Depree. I had that on my next to my bed for 15 years, along with my Bible. And the newest one that's replaced that is by General McChrystal, and it's called Team of Teams. And it's breaking down those silos of communication that he experienced when he was running the war in the Middle East back in 2003, 2004. So, and then the third one is Prayer Shield, which I didn't realize how important it is. As I get older, prayer becomes more and more and more important to me. But Prayer Shield is that we really, really need to reach out and to protect ourselves through prayer.
Yeah. So let's do those 3 again real quick.
Leadership is an Art, Max Depree, Team of Teams, General McChrystal, and then Wagner, I forget his first name, Prayer Shield is the name of the book.
Okay. All right. And last question. what does it mean to you to be a God's man of influence?
That's a very good question. The influence I'm hoping is it's not about me as the man. As Rick wrote that book, it's not about me. The purpose is to magnify God, put Him first, and I fight it. I love getting up every day because my fight is against the enemy. It's for the bride, and so I feel fortunate to be part of that army of being out there and to struggle against the enemy.
Yeah, it's great. Hey guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I have. There was plenty of little nuggets that we all heard here from Jim Hogan today. And I also would like it if you could go to standingstoneministry.org. And if you can't figure that out, just Google it. Yeah, it'll pop up. Take a look at what they do. If you find it in your hearts to help support in any one of those ways that Jim mentioned, please do so. It'd be really great. In the meantime, if you missed any part of this or you want to go back and kind of listen again or take a look at those books that he recommended, just go to godsmenofinfluence.org and just type in Jim Hogan on the search field. All those books will be there along with some of the show notes and everything we talked about here today. Other than that, be blessed, be joyous, and always be welcomed at God's Men of Influence. We'll see you next time.